There's a story in the Gemara, which I'm sure I've told you before, where Rav, one of the greatest Ameroyim, about whom it is on occasion written Rav Tanu Polig, that he can argue even with the Tanoim, he was involved in a conversation with his students about a certain question of Issa v'Heter, kosher and treif, about birds and eggs and baby birds, about the kashrus of the mother. And he made a distinction between one thing and another, between the chicks and the eggs. And the students of Rav questioned him. They couldn't understand why there would be a difference. One would be kosher, one would be not kosher. And the Gemara says, Shosek Rav. Rav was silent. Rav said nothing. Now there is a rule in halacha, in Torah, that says, Shtika Kahidah. Shtika Kahidah means silence is acquiescence. If you and a fellow are involved in an argument, and you make an argument, and they don't give you a counter-argument, that's their way of conceding. They don't have to say, I'm wrong and you're right. They simply have to not defend themselves. So normally, if two people are engaged in an argument, and one says something, the other does not respond, that's his concession. That's admitting defeat. Yet, in this Gemara in Chulin, where Rav was asked a question, and Shosik, he was silent. It's brought in Chassidus, and the Rebbe has a footnote someplace, that the halacha is like Rav. According to some poskim, we poskim like Rav. And of course the question is, if Rav was asked a question, and Rav did not give an answer, that means Rav didn't have an answer. If Rav didn't have an answer, that means Rav is wrong. If Rav is wrong, why are we poskening like Rav? It's a very simple, straight-up question. And the answer is that Rav had an answer. Rav could have explained the difference between these two things. He didn't explain the difference because he didn't have the words. He didn't have the language. He didn't have the Yossi. And the way it's explained in Chassidus is that in order for something to be articulated, expressed, and explained through the spoken word, it must be on the level of Yosod Abba or lower. The Yosod of Chochmah, which we call familiarly the Barak HaMavrik, the flash, the lightning flash, or lower. If it's higher than Yosod Abba, like for example what's called the Midas of Chochmah, or Re'iyah of Chochmah, or Ma of Chochmah, these are higher levels of Chochmah, then it becomes impossible to argue because words, language doesn't carry the subtlety, the edelkeit, the nuance of that idea. So Rav argued, explained to his students the difference. Told his students that there's a difference between one thing and another. And when they questioned him, he was quiet, not because he was defeated, but because he couldn't put it into words. This is a simple example, mashal, for the concept of Kabbalah, or Chochmah, which is of course what our Maamar is about. Our Maamar is about Kabbalah, Chochmah, and in the context, it's about salt. And the point that the Maamar is making is that Kabbalah is something you cannot understand so well. It always remains vague, ephemeral, but its effect on our lives, its effect on the limud Torah that we learn is extraordinary. When somebody is reasonable, that means to say they operate, they argue, they engage on an intellectual level. Another person can hear their argument and question it, doubt it, disagree with it. If a person says something that he considers logical, and he's not open to challenge and to debate, the credibility of his point, of his position becomes very, very precarious, very unsure, because first of all, why would a person not want to debate his position? He should want to debate and defend his position. Moreover, the fact that it cannot be debated brings into question how can we determine that it's true simply because a person says, believe me, is very far than an adequate basis on which we should believe that we're saying is the truth. Unless, of course, we're dealing with a human being who has extraordinary integrity, unbelievable emes. A person who was established as a David emes, a person who has a record of always seeking the truth in intellectual pursuits and is quick or immediate to concede defeat when he's discredited. And people know that this person's intellectual, not sharpness, acumen, but integrity, his desire for emes is so great that he will never compromise the truth to serve his own purposes. Such a person slowly gains a trust that if he says this idea is logical but I cannot put it into words, someone will say, you know what, I'll trust you. I discussed in the last class the idea that ideas exist on many levels. For an idea to be considered an idea, it has to have what we call in our culture ACS and aid, words and light. The words are the vehicle that carry the light of the idea, that allow you to present it to yourself. They allow it to present it to somebody else. They even allow you to argue about it. But then there's the concept of seichel of oyer, ideas that don't have words, which is, so to speak, relating to how the neshama reasons, how the neshama understands in a very abstract way, where you're raising your brain up to a level higher than the level of the oiros and kalim of the brain. You're sensing the eira seichel, which is in the nefesh. On that basis, you have a certain comprehension, which is to you very, very real. You can't repeat it, you can't say it, and you certainly can't argue it, debate it, and defend it. In Chassidus, we have a whole discussion, which is called Shema P'ula, Shema Teir, and Shema Etzem. Shema P'ula means a person who's not particularly intelligent, who's using his brain for whatever purpose. Shema Teir means a person who's a schooled intellectual, who's using his mind all the time, and he's very intellectually acute, sharp, fine-tuned, developed, refined. When such a person reasons, the nature of the, in Yiddish, the klep, the attachedness between himself and ideas is much, much more refined than a person who's not strictly an intellectual, not really an intellectual, is learning ideas. But Shema Teir and Shema P'ula share one characteristic. This is Oisiyat and this is ideas which are in the brain, associated with words which can be repeated and which can be debated. Shema Etzem, as the Chassidus calls, Yov Chochmas Ala Chakimin. God has given wisdom to the wise. Havaya Nasna Chochma L'Shleima. God Almighty gave wisdom to Solomon. And what this means is that a human being who's refined his mind incredibly through repeated use and through great discipline can elevate his brain to such an extent that God will give him as a gift, b'matana, a madrega of seichel v'oyer, ideas which are on a level of illumination, a level of light, which don't come down into words. He cannot repeat them to somebody else, and he certainly cannot debate them and argue them. This is a very, very important Chassidic idea. And as I explained to you last week, this Chassidic idea is predicated on the premise that ideas come from the neshama. Seichel comes before Metzias, not after Metzias. And the ideas that come from the neshama, which come before the creation, are higher than the creation, are higher than the body. And the person who is Zoiche is raised up to the Madrege to relate to the ideas as they exist on the neshama, the nefesh level. This is, in other words, how we're perceiving Kabbalah in this moment. Kabbalah is salt. In as much as Kabbalah is salt, it sweetens all food, although it has no taste itself. That means Kabbalah is a level of learning about the Eibishter, about the world, which is so abstract that even if one learns it and understands it, they're never sure they understand it fully. They don't understand it in a way of grasp. It's in a way of reaching for, trying to sense the light of something which is transcendent, which puts Kabbalah at a disadvantage. But at the same time, because Kabbalah is a chokhmah of oir, it's an elusive, it's a lofty limud, it preserves, it protects you. In other words, a person learns Torah. What's to protect that person from the Torah that he's learning becoming Salamavas. What's to protect that person from the Torah that he's learning become the basis for the enhancement of his ego, his gaiva, which ultimately will result in the fogging and the distorting of his mind, because ego is a terrible midah. And of course the answer is Pnimiyas HaTorah. When a person learns Pnimiyas HaTorah, they're connecting to a Chacham which is really beyond them. And even when they understand it, they don't understand it fully. But it redefines for them what Torah is as a whole. And it affects that their regular life, their nigel de Torah, their mitzvahs, are performed with a humility based on the fact that they sense something transcendent, Pnimiyas HaTorah, and that the transcendent thing that they sense impresses upon them a humility, a bittul, a context in the Torah that they're learning in Nigla and the mitzvahs that they're performing, and they don't become entangled and lost and confused and so forth. So Kabbalah is not something we understand completely. But Kabbalah at the same time is something which preserves, it guards, that all that we do and all that we learn on a level of greater comprehension and full comprehension should be preserved to be the way it's supposed to be. In other words, it should be for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not for some other purpose. By adding this component of light, by adding this transcendent component. This is Kabbalah. In fact, Kabbalah is compared to salt. When we talk about salt, we know about salt two things. Salt sweetens. It'll make food tasty. But salt also extracts. It'll pull blood out of the meat and so on. In other words, salt can have two effects. Salt can preserve, that means hold something, and salt can also discern, separate out and dispose of waste. These two aspects in salt, the preservative quality of salt and the discerning and separating quality of salt, are the chesed and the gevura of salt, or the chesed and the gevura of chokhmah. The chesed is I learn Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah keeps my Torah healthy. The Kabbalah keeps the Torah that I learn, the life that I live, holy, Jewish, humble. We all need that. Because all of us can become very successful at life and at Yiddishkeit and get very carried away with ourselves. We need a humility to prevent that from happening, and Kabbalah provides that so that our nigla and our Torah and our mitzvahs are the way they're supposed to be. But in addition to Kabbalah being a preservative, it keeps things, Kabbalah is also a discerner. Kabbalah also separates out and disposes of waste, which is the gevura aspect of salt. In the Maamar we're going to learn tonight, we're starting Siv Vav. We're going to learn about both of these things. We're going to learn about the idea of Kabbalah as a preservative. How learning Pnimiyas HaTorah guards us that our Yiddishkeit should be, as they say, on the level, healthy, with faith and with humility. And at the same time, the Pnimiyas HaTorah, the Kabbalah, the Chassidus that we learn also forces the issue of discernment, separate the good from the bad, not fooling ourselves. Both of these qualities exist in salt. It preserves, it keeps, and it cuts out. It recognizes what's wrong and it cuts out. And both of these aspects of Kabbalah, both of these aspects of salt, happen b'derech oir. The light of Kabbalah preserves our Yiddishkeit. The light of Kabbalah separates out what's good from and what's bad. Now, what's the point of saying the light of Kabbalah preserves, the light of Kabbalah discerns? The point of saying this is Kabbalah does not get involved. Kabbalah remains high. When we learn Kabbalah, we're raised above it. We're raised above ourselves. Kabbalah does not get involved in the nitty-gritty of our lives. It remains above. And from the above, from the aloof, from the higher place, Kabbalah preserves. And from the higher place, Kabbalah discerns. Kabbalah separates out. This is the chesed and gevura of melach, of salt. This is the chesed and gevura of chokhmah. This is the chesed and gevura of Kabbalah. You see, the logic here is as follows. If somebody is doing something, and it's your job to keep them in the straight and narrow, it's your job to keep them going crazy. If you encounter something which is a mixture of good and bad, then it's your job to separate the good from the bad. What kind of relationship will you have with this person whose role it is for you to keep them in the straight and narrow? What kind of a reaction will you have to discover that there's something no good? It has to be cut out. The instinct of a person is something is good, you want to get involved in it. Something is not good, you want to get involved and cut it out. But you see, there's a problem. The moment you get involved in preserving the good, in other words, you get too close to it, you get involved with it, you get caught up in the confusion that needs to be preserved. The moment you get involved in separating the good from the evil, in an invested way, in an involved way, you become a part of the good of the evil. And your ability to be objective about the discernment becomes impossible. In other words, in order for Kabbalah to effectively do what Kabbalah needs to do, both in Chesed and in Gevurah, both in preserving and keeping us correct in our Avodas Hashem, and in separating the good and the evil in our lives, it can only be possible by it being a little bit removed, not getting involved. One of the ways of explaining this is the concept which is called b'chokhmah is beriru. Chokhmah brings clarity. Chokhmah is beriru. Chokhmah brings clarity. And chokhmah doesn't mean chokhmah, it means chokhmah stimah. It doesn't mean chokhmah stimah, it means the Ein Sof which is in chokhmah stimah, B'tzina de Kardenisa, and so on and so forth, Tal de Bedulcha, and so on. And I'll explain it to you in very simple words. I'll give you an example. There's a Rashi and Chumash and Parshas Mishpatim, which is really strange, honestly strange. Moshe comes down from the mountain after 40 years, or whatever. And he gathered the Jewish people together. And there's a formal event of conversion, of Gerus. Just like any Ger today needs to go to the mikveh, needs to be Kabbalah mitzvahs, needs to have a bris, and so on. The Yidden and the Midbar went through the exact same process of being made Jews. They went to the mikveh, they said Nasa v'nishma, they had a bris, and so on. Part of the ceremony was that Moshe took the blood and he divided it in half. Half the blood he spread on the Mizbeach, half the blood he spread on the people. So there's a really strange Rashi on this pasuk. Vayikach es chatzi adom, he took half the blood and he put it on the Mizbeach. Says Rashi, mi cholke, who divided the blood into two halves? And Rashi answers, Ba malach v'cholke, an angel came and divided them in half. Now let me ask you a question. You need an angel to divide a cup of fluid in half? You take a measuring cup, you put half here and half here, it's done. Why does it have to be that the Malach was the one who separated the two halves? More importantly, why is the idea that the Malach separated the two halves so important that the Rashi has a need to tell us that this is Pshat in the Pasuk? What's Rashi's issue? And one of the explanations is that if you have a glass of water and you want to divide it in half, and you take the best measuring stick, measuring cup, you divide them in two, they'll be off by a molecule, they'll be off by a masho. They won't be exactly half. There's no way a human being can divide two things precisely in half. Why? Because the physical human being is on the very same physical level of the things he wishes to divide. And when two things meet that are both on the same level, they automatically interfere with one another. They can create conflict, interference. Which means that if I am trying to cut a piece of paper in half, the very fact that I am trying to cut the piece of paper in half makes it impossible for me to cut the piece of paper in half perfectly, because I'm a part of the event. And I'm a part of the event, I am leaning in one way. You take a scissor, cut a piece of paper. There's the thickness of the scissor. There's no way it could be perfect. When one physical thing interacts with another physical thing, it cannot be perfect. Evidently, for reasons we'll never understand, these carbonis blood needed to be divided precisely in half. So Moshe Rabbeinu needed a malach. Because only a malach is able to take a bucket, a receptacle of blood and divide it into two equals half. perfectly, down to the molecule, down to the atom, and so forth. Why was it so important that the blood be divided in two? I do not know. But this, I think I understand, that the need for a malach to create a division is because only a malach can divide two things in half. Now there's a philosophy to this. This is the Vart, this is the Dvar Torah. What's the philosophy? The philosophy is that if I have a piece of paper and I'm cutting it in half with the scissors, the piece of paper has physical width in mokim. My scissors has a physical width in mokim, albeit it's a small one. And the interaction between one physical thing and another physical thing makes it impossible for this to be perfect. When a human being uses 2 cups to divide a glass of fluid in half, the nature of the physical world and the physical measurement and so on and so forth is such that there's no way the measurement could be perfect. Unless the division is coming from something higher. When you and I are trying to divide something and we're apart, we live in the same world as the thing we're dividing, division cannot be perfect. But if the division comes from a higher authority, from a higher level, it comes from a level of something which is not at all involved in the two things it's dividing in between. Because it's above, the division could be perfect. And that's what Rashi is telling us. Moshe Rabbeinu's the division of the blood into 2 halves was very, very precise and very, very important. Only a malach, because a malach is not in a physical guf, is in a position to divide it perfectly in half. That's the concept of b'chochma is beriru. B'chochma is beriru essentially means clarity. And the argument is, why is it that b'chochma is beriru? Why can chochma affect the clarity in the otherwise entangled and confused words of the Eibishter? And the answer is because chochma disengages. Chochma is not involved. Chochma is not the miner going into the mine, pulling out the gold from between the layers of rock. Chochma shines a light. Chochma is above. Chochma is aloof. Because Chochma is above, Chochma is aloof, the clarity that Chochma provides is absolutely clear because it's not a part of the two things which is to contribute the clarity to. In other words, Kabbalah is an oil, it's a light. On the one hand, that light holds us, it keeps us in a proper space, it keeps us connected, it keeps us focused, it keeps us humble. And at the same time, this light of Chochma is very discerning. It notices difference between one thing and another. It can identify what is good and what is not good at a glance without getting too involved because it has a certain clarity. And the clarity that Chochma has is precisely because it's disengaged. And this is the Chochma being of salt. This is the Chochma being of Chesed, of Chochma. This is Kabbalah. The Chochma of it preserves, it shines a light that keeps our Torah mitzvah the way they're supposed to be. And at the same time, this very same light, which preserves our Yiddishkeit, also has an innate ability to discriminate, to have a sense of what's good and what's evil. If something is not good, he corrects it. These are the 2 qualities that Chochma has. These are the 2 qualities, if you will, that salt has. But one of the criteria for how it works is salt is able to have these effects because it's a little bit separate from the food. Separate. The salt preserves and the salt discerns. The chochma of salt preserves, the gevur of salt discerns. And that's what this Maamar is about. So now let's get to the Maamar. Perek Vav, it's line 326. Let's read the pasuk. V'hinei. Pirush, when you look at the pasuk, the interpretation of v'chol karboncha minchascha b'melach timlach, all your karbonis need to have salt on them. V'chol karban minchascha b'melach timlach, every mincha needs to have salt. Says the Alter Rebbe, koya la mincha, and is allusion to the mincha. Mincha means the meal offerings, the flour offering. V'achakach, it says later on, al kol karboncha takriv melach haynu b'chol karbonis kulam. All karbonis come with salt, which goes on all karbonis, which is an obvious curiosity. Why? I don't think it's too extreme to say that the main thing in a carbon is the behem, is the meat. That's the halacha. If the carbon is possible, lechem not kaddish, with the exception of the shtei halechem and so on. In every carbon, the most important thing was the carbon proper, the animal. The bread, the flour, the oil was secondary. How come, first of all, the law, the mitzvah, the krisas bris, the covenant of salt is found in the halachas of a meal offering, of a mincha, and not in the halachas of any other carbon. And how come when we discuss the krisas bris associated with salt, that you have to have salt on every carbon, first the Torah says you should put salt on the flour and the oil, and then the Torah says put flour on the carbon on the animals. Doesn't make any sense. And the answer is very simple. The reason it's written in that order is because the salt that's going on the bread is the preservative, it's the chesed of chokhmah, and the salt that's going on the meat is the discerning aspect of chokhmah, the gevura of chokhmah. That's why it's written in this order. And he says on line 328, Kihine, the meal offering is oil and flour, and bread, oil and flour, is the study of Torah. Torah is chita, chita is wheat. We had this last week, which is chav beis azvan deiraisa, the 22 letters of the Torah. Tzricha melach chanal needs to have salt, as we discussed last week at length. You're learning Torah. You want that your Torah should be connected to Hashem, and that your Torah should not become all caught up in ego and lack of objectivity, lack of emes. You need something transcendent. You need something higher than the learning to preserve the learning. What is higher than the learning that preserves the learning? Salt. Chochmas Kabbalah. Like I told you, the story that the Rebbe's father wrote to the Rebbe, that whenever you learn Torah and you want to ascertain whether you understand something correctly or incorrectly, match it up against Chochmas Kabbalah. See if it holds in Kabbalah. If it holds in Kabbalah, then you know it's true. So the reason the mitzvah of salt, the covenant associated with salt is found by flour, is because the number one function of salt is to preserve. A person is learning Torah, a person is doing mitzvahs. How do you keep that the Torah and mitzvahs should remain kodesh and not chol, should become holy and not become unholy? In other words, should be with humility rather than with ego and so forth and so on. Pnimius HaTorah, guards, it protects and it serves. That's why it comes first. And then the Rebbe continues and he says, he brings the Lashon HaMishnah. And this is what the Mishnah says, Pas ba'melach teich, when you eat bread, you eat it with salt. Interprets the Rebbe, Pas, or libada nigles. Pas means studying Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, Halacha, scholarship. In other words, ideas and Torah you can understand very well. What happens when you understand something very well? All kinds of things happen. But one of the things that happen is the ego kicks in, you enjoy it. And you can forget that the Torah comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, the Mishnah says, the Pasuk says, Ba'melach tichel, eat it with salt. In other words, mikra v'agadas v'chulu, learning Kabbalah, learning the parts of Torah that remain even after you learn them, mysterious, because the holiness, the aloofness, the aboveness of these parts of the Torah, keep it, protect it, and preserve it. Then the Alter Rebbe adds, in the Lashon HaMishnah, after it says you eat bread with salt, that you drink water from a simple vessel. Interprets the Alter Rebbe, when you learn Torah, you're a Yid. But you want to preserve your Yid, so you study Pnimius HaTorah, Kabbalah. Kabbalah means you learn and you understand and you never understand. It creates a thirst. The person's soul is thirsty to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It creates a want. When you learn Pnimius HaTorah, for many reasons, and one of them is because you don't fully understand it, you're always relating to something which is beyond your understanding, it creates a want. Says the Alter Rebbe, the solution to satisfy this want, which Pnimius HaTorah, which on the one hand preserves our Yiddishkeit, affects, on the other hand, it creates a thirst, you want more, and the answer is bechinas mayim, water. They satisfy this thirst, as it says in Sefer Yetzidah, if your heart is racing, shuv liyachad, return to oneness. In other words, if you have a desire for God, based on your reaching for Him, you should satisfy it with echad. Now, what does maya mean? A person puts salt on his bread. The bread is his life, is his Torah. The salt is the preservative of his Torah. The salt makes him thirsty, makes him want the Eibishter. How does he satisfy? With water. What's water? We don't know. But I think water means Torah, ein mayim ela Torah. More nigle, more Torah, more basav alechem. In other words, the Pnimius HaTorah preserves and guards that your Torah should be healthy. But in addition to your Pnimis HaTorah, guarding and preserving that your Torah should be healthy, it creates a thirst, which is only satisfied with more Torah and more mitzvahs. This is what you would call, in effect, the chesed of Chochmah, the chesed of salt, that preserves. Then the pasuk says, "V'akarbones," and the karbones shem b'sar ha'elu, which is the meat of the animal, hu inyan birur. This is a question of clarity. Clarity means to identify something which has within itself good and evil and separate them apart. And as I explained to you before, when you want to separate two things apart and you do it with your hand, you get involved in the good and the evil, you become a part of it. And your capacity for perfect clarity, perfect separation is impossible. If you want to separate perfectly, you separate from a distance. B'chochma yisberiru. And the Rebbe says, "V'halo as nefesh habahamis," and by separating the good from the bad, you're able to elevate the animal soul. I'm skipping one line. Sha'abasar sher shemin adam shebelev. Meat comes from blood, from gevuras. Which has to do with traits, which are animal-like. What do we know about animals? Animals are selfish, short-sighted, and worried. Animals are creatures that are extreme. In some ways they're very good, in some ways they're not good at all. You have to take the animal character traits, separate what is not good in the animal character traits, and extract the good that is in the animal character trait and use it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why you have salt. But in this case, the salt is not preserving and keeping. The salt is discerning. When a person learns Pnimius HaTorah, Pnimius HaTorah is learning light, oyer, something above. And the oyer of Pnimius HaTorah, in addition to preserving, is a clarity. As we've discussed so many times, the expression, an educated guess. Remember that expression? An educated guess is an oxymoron. If it's educated, it's not a guess. And if a guess, it's not educated. But it isn't true. An educated guess is a real thing, because an educated guess is not really guessing. An educated guess looks like a guess, but it's an instinct. Sometimes a person just knows what's true and what's false, has a clarity in a sense what's right and what's wrong, without having to get involved and to analyze and to dissect. And there's a distinct advantage to a clarity that comes from a distance. Because the clarity that comes from a distance is absolutely clear, because by not getting involved in the entanglement and the confusion, you don't become entangled and confused yourself. There's an absolute clarity. And this is the gevura aspect of Chochmah, the gevura aspect of salt. Sure, gevura is the Abba, this is the gevura aspect of Chochmah, as opposed to the chesed aspect of Chochmah. Ubechochmah is beriru, and from Chochmah there's clarity. What does it mean? Chochmah is beriru means two things. Number one, to affect the clarity in something else, you have to be absolutely clear. And number two, to affect a perfect clarity in something else, you affect that clarity in somebody else, not by engaging, but simply by observing from a distance. B'derech Chochmah, b'derech oyer. And Chochmah has this quality. Which is the reason why an Amaretz, which means an unschooled person, is not allowed to eat meat. Because in order for a person to eat meat in a constructive way, which means they're able to take the bad out and dispose of it, and take the good in and raise it up, you need to have clarity. This clarity comes from Pnimius HaTorah, from something very sensitive and subtle. An Amaretz lacks that clarity, so the meat is going to remain entangled and confused in Amaretz, and therefore he's not allowed to eat it. So here in these 10 lines or so, the Alter Rebbe connects Kabbalah to salt and salt to the Psukim, and explains why first it talks about the salt associated with Mincha, because that's the chesed aspect of the Chochmah that's preserving. Then it talks about salt that is associated with meat, because that's the gevura aspect, which is creating a certain kind of a clarity. Now we move to line 339. And here it says an additional point. Also about the clarity, the gevura aspect of salt. The Gemara Menachah says, on this pasuk b'melach timlach, that when you eat meat you have to salt it. You would think that when you're trying to salt the meat, you have to add to it a quality called tevinehu, which is bina, understanding. Or Pirish Rashi interprets, Yachal Yitin Beitam, perhaps you have to give flavor and taste to this meat. Kebina Hamasakenes Es Adam V'chulu, like understanding, which gives clarity to a human being. What is the connection between the word bina and putting salt on meat? What is the idea here? The answer is the idea that a human being has a clarity associated with bina goes on the godly soul. Now in this case, the concept of bina is the idea that it's higher than the meat, it's higher than ishtalshlus. In other words, it's quite similar to the concept of chokhmah we've been talking about all along. Ki bina hainu ben yudke. The word bina means ben yudke. In other words, understanding with a connection to yudke, like it says in Chassidus. And what bina does is it brings an absolutely perfect clarity into every situation. Line 343. And the Gemara therefore says, Yachol, perhaps, she'ein korban nefesh avhamas eilaratz. The sacrifice of an animal, and specifically, the sacrifice of the animal soul is not desired by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ele imkein, unless tishapich, it becomes transformed, l'mailos u'madregas habitul denefesh l'kis mamish, to the level and to the step of complete bittul to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the godly soul. In other words, you're engaging with klipa, with animalism. The salt is the ability to discern and separate, and in order for the carbon to be healthy and whole, it's only if the salt separates out all of the evil and throws it all together away, and separates all the good and raises it up. What we call in our culture is hapcha, total transformation. So the Alter Rebbe says, that's not so simple. The godly soul is a part of Hashem, which comes from an inner dimension of the worlds. And as a consequence, in the godly soul, there's perfect bittul to the Eibishter, but it's not because it's earned this perfect bittul. This is its nature. And say Baruch Hu, to naturally want to be on with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The animal soul, the meat, the animal, which comes from klipa. Even if you're going to try and bring clarity to the animal, which means to take out the midas rice and dispose of them, and take what's good from this animal, the intensity, the passion of the animal, and use it for kedusha, the idea that you should be able to transform an animal altogether is quite hard. So it continues on line 347, it's enough to salt. In other words, when we're trying to elevate our animal soul, which means to create clarity, separate what's not good from the animal soul from what is good in the animal soul, you don't have to do it perfectly, you have to just do it to the degree of affecting a bit layesh, that the nefesh habahamis, that the animal should give away its ego to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, "V'zehu inyan ha'hefresh bein limsa nafshe be'echad and bechinas b'chol nafshech u'mishkas nafshah." In the nefesh halakis is limsa nafshe be'echad, in the nefesh habahamis only b'chol nafshech. So here's an interesting additional point, and I have to be honest, I'm not sure what Alter Rebbe means. I'm really not sure. We understand. We're talking about a clarity that comes from the neshama. The clarity that comes from the neshama preserves our Yiddishkeit and it discerns in our Yiddishkeit. So he brings a Gemara and he explains his Gemara to mean that when we have this clarity, which is supposed to affect a discerning, a separating between good and evil, it's enough if it's only on a level of bittul hayesh. It doesn't need to be on a level of bittul atzmi. This is what it says. What does it mean? I don't know what it means. I really don't know what it means. But I'm going to take a really extreme guess. In other words, what I'm about to say is probably incorrect. But I'm going to share it anyway. When you learn in Chassidus about Birudim, what does Birudim mean? To separate good from evil, right? Where does Birudim begin? What's the first case of Birudim? Yeah? When a Shama comes into this world, it's like a person going down into a diamond mine or a gold mine. And he's dealing with all kinds of rock and all kinds of mineral formations that are the symptoms of the development of precious stones and metals and so on. And then you have to separate out the gold and the diamonds. In order to extract the gold and the diamonds, you have to go into the mine, get yourself all filthy, and you have to deal with a lot of schmutz until you find it. Then you find pieces of gold, you send it up to the surface of the earth, and then the gold has to be separated out from the junk. If you have a diamond, right? When you see a diamond set in a ring, it looks so perfect. That's not how diamonds are mined. After the diamond is brought up from the mine, they have to figure out how they can separate the diamond from the other substances, the ore or whatever it is that the diamond is mixed with, without losing the maximum value of the diamond, which is the size. So it's a whole chokhmah how you do this. So there's a lot of steps in getting a diamond to be set in a ring. There's all kinds of steps. And the earlier steps are simply identifying the diamond, pulling it out of the ground, sending it to the surface. It's still mixed with who knows what. Then it has to be separated again and separated again and separated again. And then finally it has to be cut and has to be polished and has to be set and so on. The point is, there's a lot of stages in Birurim. It's only the very, very last stage that's going to create the kind of clarity that's absolute. To use Chassidic terminology, it's only the last stage where the clarity and the division is going to be done by derech oyer. You shine a light and things are raised up. In the initial stages of Birur, in the Lashon HaChasidis, Shem ban ha-mizbarer, ha-mevarer mislabish belevushi ha-mizbarer. If you want to create clarity, you have to go to the entanglement and the confusion. If you go to the entanglement and the confusion, you become a part of the entanglement of confusion. A neshama comes into this world. So although every neshama has a chokhmah element, but as we are neshamas in this world, dealing with the realities of life, where we separate good from evil in this world, the good that we extract from the evil is very, very far from perfect. The idea that we can separate good from evil to the point that it's going to be perfect is steps away from what we're doing. So the Rebbe brings a Gemara. That the Gemara says, although ultimately the concept of salt is b'chokhmah b'diru, to create clarity in the level of his abcha, but that's many stages away from where the ordinary person is. The ordinary person also has chokhmah, also has salt that separates. But for most people, most of the time, it's enough that you separate on a level of bittul hayesh. You identify what's good, you try to raise it up. You identify what's bad, you try to dispose of it. Although the good isn't perfect, and the bad may have some good left in it, and so on and so forth, because in the initial stages, you can't expect a more perfect birur. In other words, this birur b'derech hislapshus, you separate good from evil by getting involved. And if you don't get involved, you don't create that separation. So there's two opposites here. If you want to separate good from evil, you got to go to where the good and evil are mixed. But by going to where the good and evil are mixed, your ability to separate becomes compromised. And after you separate the good from the evil, you got to separate it again and again. The final act of a chokhmah b'diru was going to be his hapcha. So the Maamar says, although on the one hand, salt discerns and separates for regular people in their regular lives, it's enough that it separates to some degree at a level of bittul hayesh. It doesn't have to be any more. I don't know, but I think this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. So we have the first idea, which is a preservative of salt, which we're going to leave alone. And we have the second idea that salt separates, it divides. And the dividing, it creates a clarity. And of course, the clarity allows for all the good to be raised up. But one of the additional aspects of the division, the separation that salt provides, and the clarity, is it disposes of what is no good. Now we move on, line 349. V'hine, haramban b'pirush hachumash kan. The Ramban, when talking about this business of salt, that the Eibishter says in the Chumash, it's a bris, it's a covenant. You don't have too many covenants in the Chumash. Hashem made a covenant with salt. That we have to put salt on every carbon and so forth. So Kasavi writes, Shamelach u'mayim, salt is really water. U'bakerech hashemesh haba bahem, because of the heat, Yasa melech b'chulu, salt emerges in the water. And like I told you in the very first shiur, our chemist is not going to say that salt in ocean water is because the sun is cooking on the water and bringing it salty. There's obviously a process that's to do with chemicals, and I don't know where the salt comes from, but the salt comes from not from the water. This is a mystical concept. This is a spiritual concept. That I perhaps, if you wanted to explain it, you would say that the more the water evaporates, the more concentrated the salt becomes. So the heat takes away the sweetness of the water and it makes the salt sharper. But whatever the chemistry is and whatever the Kabbalah is, the bottom line is salt and water go together. Water sweetness and fire are joined together. V'lachein, which explains the two characteristics of salt. Tekayim hadavar, salt is a preservative. You want to keep something, you use salt. V'gam tachlis, you want to kill something, you use salt. You want to take a piece of ground and make it impossible to plant and grow, cover it with salt. As the pasuk describes, Gofris v'melach seifa kol arsal itizoro etasmiach. If a piece of land has been affected adversely by salt, it's dead. It just kills, it takes all the nutrients, all the life out of it. So salt has two opposite characteristics. It preserves on the one hand, and it destroys on the other, which is quite consistent with the 2 points we're talking about. Pnimiyas HaTeira Kabbalah, like salt, preserving, and Pnimiyas HaTeira Kabbalah, discerning. But when the Rebbe brings here the Ramban, his intention is to bring out the 2 parts in the Gevura. In other words, forget salt on bread, which is a preservative. We're talking about salt on meat, which is a discernment, a separation. When you use Gevuras of Chochmah from a distance to identify clarity and see what is good and what is evil, there are 2 aspects to that alone. The good aspect of that is going to be raised up, and the bad aspect of that is going to be destroyed. The Rabbeinu Bechaya says the same thing. Shabiyah Devara, who explains at length, or at greater length, what the Ramban is saying. Salt has within itself both chesed, which means to embrace what is good, and gevura, dispose of what is not good, which allows the world to function healthily. For a world to function, you need kindness, but for it to function, you also need law. And both of these things exist in the gevuras of Chachma. And I'm going to skip. We're going to line 359 at the end. Lachein, I'm reading there. Yesh b'melach gam ken beis hakoyches. As we just explained, that the Ramban says, salt as a mavarer, salt as a giver of clarity, has the water, the sweet aspect, the embracing aspect, and the fire, the destructive aspect. In salt you have 2 things. As explained in Svarim and Chassidus, the Torah, which is compared to salt, and of course we mean it empowers and it weakens. Pirush, this is explained in many Maamar Chassidus, it empowers the godly soul. And without giving you long speeches, you'll learn in Maamar Chassidus that oiz, Hashem oiz la'am yitain. Hashem yevarach as ame b'shalom. Torah is called oiz and Torah is called shalom. Oiz is the power of joining together opposites. It's a very powerful koyach to preserve. And at the same time, it weakens the power of the animal soul. V'hainu, this means, al yedei ki b'chochma is beriru. Since salt is chochma, and as much as salt is chochma and gevuras of chochma, it creates clarity. There's going to be the good half, which is going to be raised up. That's the oiz. There's going to be the bad half, which is going to be disposed, and that's the tushia. It creates clarity in the animal soul. Which separates out what is evil. The evil is disposed. That's the equivalent of salt being destructive, and the good is preserved. This is the equivalent of salt raising up. And on line 370 we now read, V'hine, we know that salt can destroy what is not good. 2 lines down, now line 372. Salt has the power to preserve what is good. Salt, in other words, gevuras of Abba, which create clarity, can destroy what is not good and preserve what is good. The pasuk says about Adam, bris melech olam, he has an eternal covenant of salt. V'chein gabi David. I'm skipping a few words. V'hainu, line 373. Sheneis tam. Salt destroys what is not good and preserves and flavors what is good. Li'is tamur ukitei v'neshem. They should be able to taste and see that God is good. V'neis keich b'nefesh alakis kanal. It empowers the godly soul to be preserved. V'gam ha'hapach atev de nefesh abahamis. It transforms what is good of the animal soul. It also should be raised up into holiness. Which is the positive half of the salt on the carbon to preserve, and at the same time, what is not good it disposes of. Line 376. We find the pasuk by Elisha in Tanakh, Sheripas meyericha edei melach. The waters of the Jericho were bitter, and he made them sweet through salt. Now, what does it mean that Elisha made the waters of Yericha sweet through salt? So there's two translations. The first translation is that by putting salt into the water, this salt sweetened the water. And the Chassidus behind this would be that in the water you have good and bad. And when you put the salt, spiritually speaking, into the water, you separate the good from the bad, and the good becomes uplifted. That's the positive way of looking at it. But then on line 378, he says, there's another way of looking at it. And the other way of looking at it is not a contradiction to the first way of looking at it. It's just the other aspect. There's bitter water, there's bad water mixed with the sweet water. And the bad waters become separated out when they're separated. In other words, when the good and the bad are mixed together, it's all good. But when you separate from the upper waters to the lower waters, then the lower waters have an element which is not good. Then you have bitter waters, and you have to separate those out. In other words, if you're using salt to sweeten something which is a mixture of good and evil, by putting salt, and we don't mean it physically, we mean it spiritually, the preservative element of salt into that water, on the one hand, the good is being raised up. On the other hand, the bad which is being separated out, and that's how it's preserved. And now we move to line 381. Rabbi interprets here on the pasuk Velo Sashbis Melach, there should always be salt on a carbon. So Rashi says what the Gemara tells us. Why did Hashem say that every carbon has to have salt? Moreover, he says that putting salt in every carbon is a covenant. So Rashi says, the lower waters were promised to always be brought up on the Mizbeach, b'melach, in salt, which is of course in every single carbon, and b'nisach hamayim, and the pouring of water on the Mizbeach, which was only done once a year. V'hainu, in other words, shaydei hamelach shal carbon, by putting a salt on a carbon, mis'alim hamayim tachtenim, the lower waters are raised up, achenasa b'chinas mayim chayim, they become living waters. Here we have a new idea. We have to remember that, of course, we're talking about salt, right? But salt means chokhmah. Salt means light. Salt means a clarity that exists on a level which is above the entanglement. And because it's a clarity which is above the entanglement, it can create absolute clarity. Why do you need to create clarity? Because good and bad are mixed together. You want to extract and elevate the good. You want to identify and dispose of the evil. But here we have a new concept. The Eibishter created the world. And when the Eibishter created the world, he divided the upper waters and the lower waters. Now, how do you explain mystically what it means that when God Almighty created the world, he divided the upper waters and the lower waters? So let's be very simple. We'll call water tainug. It says in Tanya chapter 1, Mayim atzmichim kol mina tainug. All delights are connected to water. So there's different delights. There's a light from Torah, there's a light from Chassidus, there's a light from Yiras Shamayim, there's a light from pizza and from sushi. Not my cup of tea. And so forth. So if Hashem creates the world and separates the higher waters and the lower waters, what does that mean? He's separated higher delights from lower delights. Higher delights would mean delights of Torah, delights of mitzvah, delights of Avos Yisrael. By separating water from water, delight from delight, he's affecting that when one is delighting in something spiritual, it's a purely spiritual delight. On the other hand, the lower waters represent lower delights. Lower delights are physical pleasures. And let's talk this over. If God Almighty does not separate the higher waters from the lower waters, so the spiritual delights are not so lofty, and the material delights are not so low. By separating the spiritual delights from the physical delights, the higher water from the lower waters become, in effect, junk. They become representative of the delights of the physical, the flesh. And we learned in the few lines before this that in discerning and separating good from evil, using salt, spiritually speaking, the evil has to be disposed of. But the Rashi says something that contradicts all of this. How? Rashi says, and the Gemara says so, that they put salt on the Mizbeach not to separate the higher waters and the lower waters, not to separate the good from the bad. They put the salt on the Mizbeach to represent the lower waters. They put the salt on the Mizbeach to represent all those things that are not good. What are the lower waters as they're separated from the higher waters? Physical delights, pleasures, temptations. And the Gemara says, and Rashi says, they put these waters on the Mizbeach. So this is a very, very different concept than the concept you had before. The concept before said, let's identify good and raise it up. Let's identify evil, throw it away. Here we identify the evil, because Hashem himself separated the good from the evil. Hashem himself separates the lower waters and lower waters. And what are we offering on the Eibishter's Mizbeach? The lower waters. Interprets the Rebbe on line 385. This explains this idea in the nefesh. We're not talking about identifying what is not good and throwing it away, but rather to heal the bitter waters of the animal soul. That although it's drawn after physical delights and pleasures, physical pleasures are considered apitera, bitter. Now, ask a person who's eating ice cream and tell him is it sweet or bitter. He'll tell you it's sweet. So the pasuk says, "Neifes tetufen esifse zara v'charisa morachalana." It tastes good at the moment, but later it leaves a terrible aftertaste. So physical delights leave with a very, very bitter taste in our mouth. And here the idea is not that you're separating higher delights from lower delights, but transforming the lower delights. Hine, end of the line. 386, Zeh, why the Atera, you use the Teira Shnikra B'Shem Melach, which acts as a healer. That you should bring healing even to those things that are by themselves not healthy. The Hayin, or in other words, that I feel, even the lower half of the person. Which is lower than the heavens, which separates between the higher waters and the lower waters. As God Almighty separated them at the beginning of time, they are not disposed of and destroyed, but they also become elevated. Right? How do you explain this? So the expression is familiar, right? It's a Gemara. That the Gemara gives an argument that an Apokeda said to one of the Tanoim, a half a person is God and half a person is the devil. And of course, the answer is, well, not a half a person. If a human being is two half a people, he's not two halves, he's a nothing. A human being is a human being because he's whole. And if he's whole, the bottom of his feet are also a part of his humanity. Which means to say that you need to elevate even the things that on the surface are not so pure, are not so refined, and not so holy, to bring God even into the ordinary things. So here's another idea. That you take salt, which represents the lower waters, which represents physical pleasures and physical temptations, and put them on the Mizbeach. Not separate them out, but find a way of using even these physical things in the service of HaKadosh Baruch. So here, Melach is something very different. Melach is no longer seen as separating the good from the evil and throwing the evil away, but to the contrary, Melach represents the evil, raising it up and using it in Avodas Hashem. And he continues on line 389. Now that we understand this additional dimension, that in addition to salt being a preservative, in addition to salt separating good from bad, salt elevates even something which is by itself representative of something which isn't good and transforming it into good. That's why it's called bris alikecha, bris to the name Elikim. And he interprets, all of us understand that concealment of godliness, which is the basis for pleasures that leave the bitter taste described above, come from the name of the Eibishter Elikim. From this 120 formations of Elikim, Elikim is 5 letters. And if you arrange 5 letters in every possible order, you have 120 tziruf. which is sent all the way down to the lowest levels. From the nega. So in the divine name, Elokim, there's 220 tziruf. Lower than Elokim is Noiga. Noiga is already Klipa, and in Noiga also there's 120 tzirufim. Shebein Shneim Nasa Mar. The first 120 tzirufim is still godliness. The second 120 tzirufim is Klipa. And 120 and 120 is 240, which is Mar, which is bitter, which is based on Kufchaf, which is Cheshvan Amalek. Amalek is also 240. That even on this level of Elikim and Merirus, you're not throwing away all of it, but you're identifying and raising up what can be raised up, even from Klippa. You bring down from the very heights of Kedusha, and what you can preserve, you're able to preserve, and so forth. I suppose if you needed to find an explanation for this would be the shaloi lishma that leads to the lishma. That you do things for the wrong reason, that'll later come for you to do things to the right reason. I'm having a conversation with one of my students who's a teenager. And teenagers live in the world of black and white. They don't live in the world of shades of gray. And they have a very terrible time with shades of gray, because shades of gray is to them hypocrisy. So I mentioned to them a maamar from the Alter Rebbe, which is really controversial. But what's so powerful about it is that this is a maamar which the Alter Rebbe wrote mamish before he passed away, which means it's like, so to speak, the height of his life, the zenith, the pinnacle of his life. It's a small little maamar. It's printed in the Igris Kedish of the Alter Rebbe. Hanefesh HaShfeila. It's one page. And the spirit of that page is that the Eibishter put people in this world to do chesed shel sheker, chesed shel eina shel emes. That in this world, you have to make a dinner and bring in a rich man and give him honor and lay it on thick so you give a few dollars to preserve a yeshiva. I heard from a person once the most incredible story, that there was a Jew who donated to a certain school $50,000, but this is 50 years ago, it was a lot of money. And he was so into the dinner that he ran the entire dinner from his business office. His secretaries took the calls, and they made the reservations, and so forth and so on. And at the dinner he was honored. At the honor he was given a plaque, and the plaque was made of solid gold, and the plaque costed $36,000, which meant he took a $36,000 kickback. He gave the school $14,000, and the school made a dinner and gave him a covered and said, Yashir. How arrogant, how self-absorbed does a human being have to be? But the Eibishter, who's smarter than me and you, decided this is Rabbi Mechavad Ashirim. This is the way it's supposed to be. This is an example of Mayim Tachteinim. It doesn't look good, doesn't look very holy, but this is how you serve the Eibishter in this world. And the Mayim Tachteinim themselves become elevated. Not like we said before that you separate it out, but that the Mayim Tachteinim become elevated. In any case, let's continue. Line 393. Another idea. Melach is 78. 78 is 3 times Yud Kei Vav Kei, 26 times 3. And he says that these 3 Shem Havayis goes on the Birchas Kohanim. It's written by Adam Bris Melach. The Kohanim have a covenant. Say 3 blessings. Shem Gimel, Shem Esavaya, and each one of the 3 brachas, Yivarach Hashem, V'yishmerecha Yoyer Hashem, Panavelacha V'chanisa Hashem, Panavelacha, Shosh and Geveya made. Now the source of the Birchas Kohanim is of course very high, like we learned. Maamar Velo Sashbis is Lamayla Meish Tal Shalos, like it says in the Maamar, yes, of Parshas Nosei, and also of Parshas Kerech, Matayaren. U'Bazehu Kiyam Ha'elam, and it preserves the world. Bazehu Shenikra Melach Shu Kiyam Adavid, Melach Salt preserves. Although on the one hand it's Gevura, we define the content of Gevura by Kohanim as well. In other words, Kohanim are people of Chesed, but there's a Gevura aspect. What's important to appreciate is, this is another example of Melach on the one hand being Gevura, on the other hand being a preservative. And he continues, line 397, Bris Melach, Bris Alikech. You bring down a very high level of Hashem, of Havai, of godliness, into a lekecha. In other words, that even in things and in places where godliness is altogether concealed, you should be able to reveal godliness. Just like salt sweetens. It sweetens the judgment of Shem Elikim. The same is true in all situations. And go to line 409. It is a concept in Chassidus that although there's a higher level of Achdus and a lower level of Achdus, and of course the lower level of Achdus is associated with Yeshus. I'm me and I'm serving Hashem in a limited way. There's a concept of joining together the lower unity and the higher unity. Similarly, there's an idea of not separating the higher waters from the lower waters, to dispose of the higher waters, of the lower waters, but to separate the lower waters and the higher waters, that even the lower waters should become raised up like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now comes the question. This is the Shir. How many different concepts did we have tonight? Okay. The first concept we had, which is the same concept as last week, is that the Gevuras of Chachma preserve. You have something good, you have to keep it good. The way you keep it good is from a light which is above it. That's the Gevuras of Chachma. The second idea is that the Gevuras of Chachma separate, like by karbanis. You're separating the good from the bad of the animal. Birurim, and the Alter Rebbe mentioned that there is absolute birur, and then there's a limited birur, and limited birur is also satisfactory. The third idea we learned is that when you separate good from bad, the good is raised up, and the bad is disposed. This is the Ramban. And the last idea is that even after you separate the good from the bad, there is a concept of taking that bad and using it for good and raising that up as well, as the Rashi says that the Bris Melach was to raise up the lower waters, not to dispose of them.